The HOA added a $4,800 assessment to my home and threatened late fees and a lien, even though no approval appeared in the association's records. The manager insisted the board had handled it privately, then blocked my request for the vote, contractor agreement, and payment schedule. I started building a timeline from agendas, invoices, and owner notices. That was when minutes from the disputed meeting surfaced, and they showed the assessment motion had failed. The real problem was no longer whether the vote existed, but how a rejected charge had entered 86 homeowner accounts. Has your HOA ever demanded money without showing the vote behind it? Share your experience below, and watch how one failed motion turned into a much larger accountability problem. 3 weeks earlier, none of that was visible. I had logged into the Cedar Glen homeowner portal to confirm that my regular monthly dues had cleared. The balance should have been zero. Instead, a new line sat beneath the payment history. Emergency capital assessment, $4,800. At first, I assumed the software had made a mistake. I refreshed the page. The charge remained. A notice attached to the entry gave owners 30 days to pay. After that, late fees could be added, delinquent balances could be sent to collection, and the association reserved the right to use the lien remedies described in Cedar Glen's declaration. This was not a reminder about a clubhouse rule. It was a new debt tied directly to my home. I downloaded the notice, saved the account statement as a PDF, and took screenshots showing the date, time, balance, and transaction code. I also saved that morning's email. Its subject line called "The Charge an Emergency Assessment for Repairs" to the retaining wall beside the community parking area. The email confirmed that the assessment applied to every homeowner. 86 identical charges meant someone had created a batch and sent it through the system on purpose. Cracks had appeared along one section of the retaining wall, and the board had circulated photographs after an inspection. But discussion was not approval, and I could not remember receiving any notice that a $4,800 assessment had passed. Before I contacted the manager, I opened the association's records page. I wanted to see the vote for myself. There was no vote posted. Not in the announcements, annual budget, or most recent meeting minutes. I opened every file posted during the previous 2 months. One agenda listed an engineer's findings. Another mentioned contractor bids. A third included a proposed special assessment under new business. None said the assessment had passed. No owner notice announced the result of a vote. The minutes from the meeting where the assessment had been discussed were missing. The $4,800 charge was not a future proposal. It was already sitting on my account with a deadline and collection language attached. Somewhere between the meeting and the next morning, a discussion had become a debt. Earlier board emails described cracks in the retaining wall and warned that repairs could become more expensive if delayed. They asked owners to attend the meeting and review contractor estimates. But there was no follow-up saying the board had approved a special assessment. I also searched for a written consent or a later special meeting, because a missing set of minutes did not prove that no other authorization existed. The records page showed neither. I wrote to Parker Management that afternoon. I asked for the meeting notice, roll call, approved minutes, contractor agreement, payment schedule, and the resolution authorizing the charge. The response came less than an hour later. It did not include a single document. The manager said the board had handled the matter in executive session because of the emergency nature of the repairs. Certain records, the message added, were not available for general distribution. Executive session might explain why some discussion was private under Cedar Glen's bylaws. It did not explain why every homeowner had received the same $4,800 charge, why the public agenda showed a proposed vote, or why no approval appeared anywhere owners could see. I replied with one narrower question: what recorded board action authorized the assessment against my home? The manager did not answer it. Instead, I received a second message repeating that the board had acted within the emergency authority described in the governing documents and that payment remained due within 30 days. Parker Management sent me a short summary of the retaining wall inspection and 2 photographs showing cracks near the lower edge of the community parking area. Elaine Mercer, the board president, followed with a community update saying the association could not risk waiting through another round of delay before the rainy season. I did not argue that the wall was fine. I did not claim the repairs were unnecessary. I asked the same question again. Where was the vote that authorized a $4,800 charge against my home? The answer shifted each time. First, the The manager said the board had acted in executive session. Then Elaine described the charge as an emergency measure. Later, the manager said the formal minutes were still being prepared. None of those explanations came with a roll call, signed resolution, contractor agreement, or payment schedule. Elaine's update framed the issue as a choice between acting now and allowing a dangerous condition to get worse. She warned that the contractor's price might expire, and that any delay could increase the final cost to homeowners. One neighbor told me that challenging the assessment would only slow down repairs everyone knew were needed. The wall was visible. The missing authorization was not. The board could point to concrete, photographs, and an engineer's summary. I could only point to the absence of a record they claimed existed, so I stopped arguing in general terms. I sent one more written request, this time limited to 4 items: the vote count, the signed minutes, the resolution approving the assessment, and the contract that depended on the money. The manager replied that certain executive session materials were confidential and that the assessment remained due. If the board had approved the charge, there should have been some record showing when it happened and who voted for it. If there was no such record, then 86 homeowners were being told to pay first and trust the explanation later. I was not ready to do that. The assessment notice went into a single folder. Then the email announcing the charge, the meeting agendas, the inspection summary, the photographs, and every reply from Parker Management. The board meeting had taken place on a Tuesday evening. The assessment appeared in the portal the next morning. The owner email went out minutes later. By noon, all 86 accounts carried the same charge. Whatever decision had produced the batch entry happened overnight. I opened the PDF properties for the notices and recorded the creation times. The assessment document had been generated before the community email was sent. The transaction code on my account matched the code on 2 statements shared by neighbors who had removed their names and addresses. It was a coordinated entry across the entire association. I built a simple timeline with 6 columns: date, event, document, person responsible, account effect, and unanswered question. At the top, I placed the meeting. Beneath it, the batch creation, the account postings, the email notice, and the payment deadline. The blank column was authorization. I still did not know who had ordered the charge, but I now knew what records could answer that question. A batch affecting 86 homes had to be created by someone with system access. It should also have an approval field, a source document, or an internal instruction attached to it. A system entry could be traced more reliably than a shifting explanation. Dates, user fields, attachments, and reference numbers would either support the board's story or expose the gap in it. I sent Parker Management a formal records request by certified mail. It asked for the account batch log, the authorization attached to the assessment, the contractor payment schedule, and the official minutes from the meeting. I also requested that all electronic records related to the charge be preserved. The delivery receipt arrived 2 days later. For the first time, I was no longer just disputing a number. I was tracing the path that put it there. Parker Management responded near the end of the record's deadline with a download link and a note saying the association had satisfied my request. It contained an engineer's inspection summary, 3 contractor estimates, photographs of the retaining wall, and a 1-page reserve balance. There was nothing showing that the $4,800 assessment had been approved. The signed minutes were missing. So were the vote count, the resolution, the batch authorization, and the contractor payment schedule. I wrote back with a list of the records that had not been included. The manager answered that the minutes were still being finalized and that internal communications related to executive session were not available for general owner review under Cedar Glen's document policy. The assessment had already been charged, the payment deadline was running, and some owners had begun paying. Yet the record supposedly authorizing all of it was still unfinished. Elaine sent another community update the same afternoon. She said the contractor was holding its price for a limited time and warned that any further delay could increase costs. The message encouraged owners to pay promptly so the project would not lose its place on the schedule. The language in Cedar Glen's declaration and bylaws allowed the board to address urgent conditions and approve necessary work. But the special assessment section still required recorded board approval before the charge could be placed on owner accounts. I did not treat that reading as a final legal conclusion, but it was enough to show why emergency did not answer the question I kept asking. A board might have authority to protect the property. That did not automatically explain who had approved a $412,800 charge against 86 homes. The contractor estimate had an expiration date only 11 days away. That deadline explained the pressure, but not the missing vote. The association appeared to be moving forward, as if the charge were settled, while refusing to produce the document that made it enforceable. The estimate itself did not authorize owner billing. It showed what the contractor proposed, how long the price remained open, and why Lien wanted speed. The missing step was still the board's approval. I added every new file to my timeline and marked the unanswered items in red. The folder was getting thicker. The proof I needed was still absent. Some owners paid immediately. They did not trust the assessment, but they trusted the collection language even less. Others asked Parker Management for installment plans. A few decided to wait until the board produced the missing approval. They were now discussing what could happen to a homeowner who refused to pay a charge already sitting on the account. Lien sent a community update. She said the contractor was holding its schedule, but the association could not guarantee the same price if work was delayed. Owners were told not to interfere with the project and reminded that unpaid balances would follow the association's normal collection policy. In the community forum, one owner wrote that challenging the assessment would only force everyone else to pay more later. Another said the board had been elected to make difficult decisions and should be allowed to do its job. I did not argue about the wall or accuse anyone of misconduct. I posted one question: can anyone provide the recorded vote approving the $4,800 assessment? A few owners replied that they had not seen the vote either. One said she had paid because she was preparing to refinance and did not want an unpaid HOA balance appearing during the process. Another said Parker Management had offered him a payment plan but still had not shown him the authorization. Then the thread disappeared. The manager sent me a private notice saying individual account disputes had to be handled privately and should not be discussed on the community forum. By the end of that week, several neighbors forwarded payment confirmations. The amounts varied because some had paid in full and others had made their first installment, but the money was moving into the association's account. Until then, the assessment had been a demand backed by a deadline. Now it was producing real payments while the records remained incomplete. I updated my timeline and added a new column: money collected. The first entries were small compared with the $412,800 the association expected, but they proved the system was working as designed. The disappearing thread had another effect. Owners began sending records privately instead of relying on the forum, which gave me statements, timestamps, and payment confirmations the manager could not erase from their inboxes. The board had not shown us an approved vote. The charge was being collected anyway. The board secretary emailed me after seeing my certified records request listed in the association's correspondence log. She said she had already sent Parker Management the signed meeting packet several days earlier, including the official minutes from the night the assessment was discussed. I replied with a narrow request for the exact packet she had described. Parker Management answered by uploading another copy of the agenda and the same inspection summary I already had. I wrote back with the file name the secretary had given me. A few hours later, a larger PDF appeared in the portal. It was not placed in the folder for current meeting minutes. It was buried in an archive directory beneath old board packets, where most owners would have had no reason to look. The document contained 32 pages. The first section covered routine approvals, maintenance updates, and the engineer's report. Then came the contractor discussion. Near the end of the packet, I found the page labeled Special Assessment Motion. The roll call sat beneath it. 2 yes votes, 2 no votes, 1 abstention. Below that was a short line stating that the motion did not carry. The packet bore the secretary's signature and the date it had been approved for the association's records. It was not an unsigned draft. It was not a rumor from someone who had attended. It was the document Parker Management had told me was still being finalized. I saved the PDF in 3 places, recorded the time it appeared, and downloaded the portal activity page showing when it had been uploaded. I checked the archive path twice to make sure the packet had not been available there all along. The portal activity record showed it had been uploaded only after my second request. The question I had been asking for weeks finally had an answer. The board had voted on the assessment. It had failed. What I still did not know was who had ordered the charge to be posted the next morning. The motion proposed a $4,800 special assessment for each of Cedar Glen's 86 homes. 2 directors voted yes, 2 voted no. The 5th director abstained because of a previous business relationship with the contractor under consideration. The chair recorded that the motion did not carry. The next line said the board would review additional bids at a later meeting. There was no second vote, no amended motion, no written resolution authorizing the charge after the meeting. Nothing in the packet converted the failed motion into an approved assessment. The secretary's signature matched older Cedar Glen records. The approval date was visible. The file metadata showed that the packet had been created before Parker Management told me the minutes were still being finalized. The document established a sequence. The board considered the assessment. The motion failed. The next morning, the charge appeared on 86 accounts anyway. I sent Parker Management a new letter with the relevant page attached. This time, I did not ask for an explanation of emergency authority. I asked for 4 immediate actions. Suspend collection of the $4,800 charge. Reverse any late fees already posted. Confirm that no lien activity would begin while the authorization was disputed. Preserve the electronic audit log showing who created the batch assessment and what instructions supported it. The manager acknowledged receiving the letter, but did not answer those requests. Elaine responded later that afternoon. She said the minutes did not reflect all of the authority the board had relied on after the meeting, and repeated that the retaining wall required urgent action. Her message did not identify a later vote. It did not attach a resolution. It did not explain why the owner accounts had been charged before any new approval appeared in the record. Until then, I had been trying to prove that the assessment had never been approved. The minutes answered that question as clearly as the record could. The charge still existed. Owners were still paying. The deadline was still running. Parker Management still had control of the account system, and Elaine was still treating the assessment as enforceable. The real question was no longer what happened inside the meeting. It was what happened after it. Someone had instructed management to create a $412,800 batch charge after the board rejected the motion. That instruction had to come from somewhere, pass through someone's account, and connect to a contractor schedule or payment plan. That shift mattered because it gave the dispute a testable mechanism. A meeting could be described in competing ways. A batch log had a creator, a timestamp, an attachment, and a result. I stopped searching for a vote that did not exist. I started following the batch. I asked Parker Management for the account system records tied to the assessment batch. I asked for the batch creation date, the user account that initiated it, the approval field, the attached instruction, the export showing which homes were charged, and any reversals entered afterward. 3 days later, management sent a transaction summary. It confirmed that all 86 accounts had been charged in one batch at 8:14 the morning after the meeting. It listed the total amount as $412,800 and showed that the entry had been created from an administrative profile. But the field labeled Requested By had been blacked out. The attachment column showed a reference number instead of a document name. It matched the code printed at the bottom of one contractor document Parker Management had produced, the payment schedule they had refused to release in full. I added both documents to the timeline and placed the matching reference numbers side by side. That connection did not prove who had ordered the charge. It did prove that the assessment batch and the contractor payment process were linked inside the association's records. One neighbor had worked in bookkeeping. I showed her the redacted summary and asked how systems like this usually worked. She explained that a batch affecting dozens of accounts was not something the software created on its own. Someone with the right access had to enter or upload it, and there was usually an approval record or source document attached. The summary already showed that the charge had been created deliberately, after the vote failed, and connected to a contractor payment reference. I sent one follow-up request. Please provide the unredacted requested by field, the document attached to the reference number, and the authorization used to create batch CG04117. Parker Management replied that internal user information was confidential. I answered that I was not asking for passwords, security credentials, or personal contact information. I was asking which authorized officer had directed management to place a disputed $4,800 debt on every home. The redaction now became part of the obstacle. Management had produced enough data to confirm the batch, but withheld the one field that could connect the charge to an authorized decision-maker. The board's explanation depended on emergency authority. The owner accounts depended on a batch instruction. The contractor schedule appeared to depend on the same reference number. If those records connected, the failed vote would no longer be an isolated defect in the minutes. It would be the first step in a transaction someone had already set in motion. The unredacted records arrived only after several owners submitted the same request. Parker Management released the contractor proposal first. Attached to it was a one-page authorization form that had not appeared in the earlier records package. Northline Civil Contractors had offered to stabilize and rebuild the damaged section of retaining wall. The price was valid for a limited period, and the company wanted confirmation that Cedar Glen had secured funding before reserving equipment and a work crew. The problem was in the authorization page. A box labeled "Board Approval Confirmed" had been checked. Below it, Elaine Mercer had signed as board president. The form was dated the night of the meeting, after the motion had failed. A handwritten instruction at the bottom directed Parker Management to prepare owner billing the following morning so the contractor schedule would not be lost. Nothing on the form mentioned the 2-2 vote. Nothing said one director had abstained. Nothing disclosed that the motion had not carried. The document did not show that Northline knew any of that. From the contractor's side, the association president had represented that board approval existed and that funding would come from an assessment already authorized. The contractor had relied on information supplied by Cedar Glen. The decision to turn a failed motion into an approved project had happened inside the association. The management audit log followed later that day. This version included the field that had been redacted before, requested by Elaine Mercer, board president. The timestamp was 7:46 the morning after the meeting. At 8:14, a Parker Management administrator created batch CG0417 and posted $4,800 to each of the 86 owner accounts. The attached reference number matched the contractor authorization form. The board voted. The motion failed. Elaine signed a form saying approval had been confirmed. She instructed management to prepare billing. Management created the batch. The charge appeared on our homes. I updated the timeline and attached each record to the event it supported. I still did not know whether Elaine believed emergency authority allowed her to bypass the failed vote. The documents established what she had done, when she had done it, and what happened next. The form did not prove a crime or reveal Elaine's private motive. It proved a narrower, more useful fact. Management received a written representation of approval after the recorded vote had failed. A rejected assessment reached 86 homeowner accounts because the board president represented it as approved and instructed management to post it anyway. But answering that question did not remove the charge. Owners were still paying. The deadline was approaching, and Parker Management had given no indication that collection would stop. With the audit log and authorization form in hand, I no longer needed another explanation. I needed the association to stop acting on the charge. A small group of owners joined me in sending a formal demand to Cedar Glen and Parker Management. Freeze collection of the $4,800 assessment. Reverse any late fees. Refund payments already received. Withdraw any lien notices tied to the charge. Hold a properly noticed board meeting and take a recorded vote before imposing any new assessment. Preserve the contractor, account, and management records connected to batch CG0417. The demand did not ask the board to abandon the retaining wall project. It gave them a way to correct the process, reconsider the bids, and bring the funding question back before the board without treating a failed motion as approved. Elaine rejected it. Her response said suspending collection would put the association at financial risk and could cause Northline to withdraw its proposal. She repeated that urgent conditions justified the action already taken, and said the board could not allow procedural disagreements to endanger common property. She did not explain why the authorization form said board approval had been confirmed. Parker Management continued sending payment reminders. The board secretary and one of the directors who had voted no requested a special meeting. Elaine answered that board counsel was reviewing the matter and that no additional meeting would be scheduled until that review was complete. Every day strengthened the association's practical position. More owners paid. More installment plans were created. The contractor proposal remained tied to money collected under the disputed charge. Even without a valid vote in the record, the assessment was becoming harder to unwind. I hired an attorney who handled homeowner association disputes. I gave her the signed minutes, the account statements, the management audit log, the contractor authorization form, and the demand letter. She focused on the immediate risk under Cedar Glen's own declaration. The records showed a failed motion, followed by a batch charge, followed by active collection. If Cedar Glen began filing liens before the authorization dispute was resolved, each affected homeowner would face a more serious problem tied to title, refinancing, and sale. The attorney prepared a final notice giving the association a short opportunity to suspend enforcement voluntarily. It offered the same safe exit as before: stop collection, preserve the money already received, and hold a recorded vote under the governing documents. The safe exit also protected the homeowners who believed the wall required immediate work. A new vote could approve a lawful assessment without forcing anyone to defend the charge already sitting on the accounts. Lien declined again. The issue was no longer whether Cedar Glen would correct the charge on its own. It was whether the association could be stopped before the collection system turned the rejected assessment into a lien against my home. The 30th day passed without Cedar Glen suspending the charge. The next morning, late fees appeared. Parker Management's portal showed the same pattern across the statements neighbors shared: the original $4,800 assessment, a new delinquency charge, and a notation that the balance had entered the association's collection process. I could verify several full payments and a handful of installment payments from the confirmations owners sent me. I could not yet know the complete total because Parker Management had not produced a full reconciliation. One owner had used savings intended for property taxes. Another had borrowed from a relative because she feared a lien would interfere with the sale of her home. The neighbor preparing to refinance had paid immediately and asked Parker Management for written confirmation that her account was clear. Owners who had not paid began receiving formal notices. Mine arrived by certified mail. The letter identified the $4,800 assessment, the late fee, and the date by which the account had to be brought current. It warned that Cedar Glen intended to use the lien remedies described in the declaration if the balance remained unpaid. I placed the notice beside the signed minutes. One document said the motion had failed. The other treated the rejected charge as an enforceable debt against my home. We had found the minutes. We had traced the batch to Elaine's instruction. We had shown that the contractor authorization stated that board approval had been confirmed. None of those records had changed the balance on the portal. Parker Management still controlled the accounts. Elaine still insisted that emergency authority supported the assessment. More owners were paying because the consequences of resisting felt more immediate than the defect in the vote. My attorney prepared a petition for temporary injunctive relief in Cedar County Civil Court, which had general authority over contract and association disputes. The request was limited. We were not asking the court to decide every dispute about the wall, remove the entire board, or award sweeping damages. We asked for an order stopping collection, additional late fees, and lien activity until Cedar Glen could show authorization under its declaration and bylaws. I photographed the envelope, saved the tracking history, and scanned every page before giving the original to my attorney. The notice was now evidence of both the deadline and the threatened property consequence. The collection notice gave the case a deadline the missing minutes never had. It was a formal step aimed at my title. The county recorder, the police, and the management company's internal process did not have the authority to decide whether the association could keep enforcing the assessment. The petition went to Cedar County Civil Court. The filing was built around a narrow record. We attached the signed minutes showing the motion had failed, my account statement, the collection notice, the management audit log, the contractor authorization form, and the provisions from Cedar Glen's declaration and bylaws. The board secretary provided a sworn statement confirming that the minutes were the official record of the meeting and that no later vote had been recorded in the packet she maintained. The association's response did not deny the vote count. Instead, it argued that the retaining wall presented an urgent condition, that the president had a duty to protect common property, and that delaying the project could expose the association to greater costs. It also argued that the written minutes did not capture every discussion that took place after the formal vote. My attorney did not try to prove anyone's motive. Could Cedar Glen continue adding fees and moving toward liens when its own signed record showed that the assessment motion had not passed and its governing documents required recorded board approval? The association pointed to the condition of the wall. We pointed to the collection chain. A necessary repair did not automatically prove that this particular charge had been properly imposed under Cedar Glen's documents. Emergency authority might allow the board to take protective action, but the association still had to explain how a failed motion became an enforceable debt against 86 privately owned homes. The petition therefore did not ask the judge to manage Cedar Glen. It asked the court to preserve the existing position until the association could identify a valid source of authority for the charge. The hearing was scheduled before the next round of lien activity could begin. Until then, the balances remained on the portal. The money already collected remained under the association's control, and every document now sat in front of the one authority with the power to interrupt the process. At the hearing, the judge did not try to decide the entire dispute in one morning. Cedar Glen still claimed that the emergency provisions in its declaration justified moving quickly. First, the signed minutes showed that the $4,800 assessment motion had failed. Second, Cedar Glen had not produced a later vote or written resolution approving the charge. Third, the association had already added late fees and begun collection activity, while that authorization remained unresolved. Elaine's attorney argued that the president had acted to protect common property and preserve the contractor's price. He said the board could not be forced to wait while a damaged wall became more expensive or dangerous. My attorney did not dispute the need for repairs. The association might have had options for temporary safety work, a new vote, reserve spending, or another funding plan authorized under its documents. What it had done instead was place a $4,800 debt on 86 privately owned homes after the recorded motion failed. The judge asked Cedar Glen to identify the document that converted the failed vote into an approved assessment. The association pointed to the emergency provisions, Elaine's authorization form, and the contractor schedule. None of those was a later board vote. The court did not rule that every action Cedar Glen had taken was unlawful. It did not decide damages, remove directors, or make findings about anyone's intent. The temporary order suspended collection of the $4,800 assessment. Cedar Glen could not add further late fees, advance lien filings tied to the charge, or transfer the disputed funds to the contractor while the case remained under review. The order also required the association and Parker management to preserve the account logs, contractor records, and internal instructions connected to batch CG04117. Finally, Cedar Glen had to produce a full reconciliation showing who had paid, which accounts had received fees, and what collection notices had already been issued. The portal balances did not disappear that afternoon. Owners who had paid did not receive instant refunds. The retaining wall dispute was not over, but the collection chain had been broken. For weeks, Cedar Glen had relied on deadlines, late fees, and lien language to make the assessment feel final before anyone tested the approval behind it. The judge's restraint kept the ruling proportional. The court did not decide whether the wall was an emergency. It decided that collection pressure should not outrun the unresolved record of approval. Now the association could no longer use that pressure while avoiding the failed vote in its own minutes. The temporary order forced Cedar Glen to account for every dollar and every collection step tied to the assessment. Parker Management's reconciliation supplied the exact figures I had not been able to confirm earlier. All 86 homes had been charged. 20 owners had paid the assessment in full, for a total of $96,000. Other partial payments were listed separately and returned with the same corrections. None of the money had been transferred to Northline. Before the court reached a final hearing, the board scheduled a properly noticed special meeting. The secretary circulated the signed minutes, the audit log, the contractor authorization form, and the court's temporary order to all directors. At that meeting, the board voted to rescind the original assessment. Parker Management then removed the $4,800 charge from every owner account, reversed the related late fees, withdrew the collection notices, and issued refunds. The 20 full payments totaling $96,000 were returned. Partial payments were returned according to the reconciliation. Cedar Glen filed a notice confirming that it had stopped enforcement and completed the account corrections. After my attorney verified the refunds and the zero balances, the parties submitted a joint dismissal of the temporary case as moot. The court never entered a final judgment declaring fraud, awarding damages, or deciding Elaine's intent. Its role had been narrower: preserve the records and stop the collection chain long enough for the authorization problem to be corrected. The retaining wall did not disappear from the agenda. Cedar Glen still needed a repair plan, but the project returned to the process required by the association's own documents: updated bids, open discussion, a recorded vote, and funding tied to an actual approval. At a later organizational meeting, the directors voted to replace Elaine as chair. She remained an elected director until the next membership election, but she no longer controlled meeting agendas or communications with Parker management. No future special assessment could be batch posted unless the request included a recorded vote number, a signed resolution, and confirmation from 2 authorized board officers. Management added that control after the board directed it to do so. The final correction separated every consequence by source. The court paused enforcement. The board rescinded the assessment. Management corrected the ledgers. The parties dismissed the case only after those changes were verified. I logged into the homeowner portal. The transaction history still showed the assessment. Beside it was a second entry: $4,800, reversed. My balance was 0. The minutes had not fixed the account by themselves. They had shown where the approval chain broke. The audit log identified the instruction that followed. The contractor form showed what representation connected the failed vote to the billing system, and the temporary court order stopped that paperwork from becoming liens while the association corrected its own records. The wall still had to be repaired. What Cedar Glen could no longer do was make homeowners fund it through a board approval that never existed.